because to me, I think that's exactly what Jesus did with his 12 disciples.
Yeah.
They went on this 3-year healing journey where they had to deconstruct some things and reconstruct some things. And by the time he sent them on mission, they weren't healed up perfectly, but enough so that they could actually start a movement.
Welcome to MyBLVD.
All right, we are here with Daniel Yang. What's up, Daniel? How are you doing, sir?
Hey, man, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Man, I appreciate it. This seems like deja vu. It's like we're just on this thing, and it's just like multiple times. But no, I'm really appreciative. I just want that was one of those jokes that you tell that no one gets it because they don't understand that we just recorded 20 minutes of an episode and realized that I did not hit record. That's what happens when, So when I'm the technical guy.
That's where I know you're a good leader, because you would admit humbly that we made that mistake. So not all leaders.
I mean, hey, I'm just because there's some type of comic relief that has to come out of this. So like everyone else's laughter is it's helping me to say that there was purpose to the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
The last 20 minutes. So anyway, we're gonna start over again, and all of it's easy because it's all genuine, and I really do appreciate just kind of who you are and in our lives. And we've had the opportunity to serve for years, together through Send Network and through the Church Multiplication Network and your time at Wheaton, but you have recently stepped down from your time at Wheaton to do on to newer, bigger, better things, if I can say it that way. You can't say it, I guess, but I can say bigger, better things. Like you're now reaching the world, the globe, right? So talk a little bit about what you're doing with the NAE and share about this new endeavor.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me on, Dhati. We have been in some trenches together, and so we may have gotten shot at a couple times, but that's made us smarter. So it's good to do this with you. Appreciate your leadership and having me on. I was with Wheaton, leading the Church Multiplication Institute for the last 6.5 years, and then about 3 months ago came on with World Relief. As you said, World Relief is the humanitarian arm for the NAE, National Association of Evangelicals. And so for 80 years, World Relief has been the global response for the NAE in terms of how do we respond to global disasters. In the U.S. particularly, we work among primarily immigrants and refugees. And it's directly connected to my personal story. My family, we were refugees from Laos, and we landed in the United States in 1979. We were sponsored by a little Lutheran church in East Moline, Illinois. And although I grew up in Detroit most of my life, it was that little church in Illinois that sponsored my parents and led my dad to Christ. At the age of 41, 42, he became a follower of Jesus, the first follower of Jesus in the history, in the lineage of my family. And so changed the trajectory for the rest of our life. And so come into an organization like World Relief, where what I'm doing with Churches of Welcome, that's the initiative that I lead, is I'm working to create a network of churches that are doing mission by engaging immigrants and refugees, and also helping immigrants and refugees get on mission. And so that's really is the work that I'm doing. 3 months into it, I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited to work with a lot of church networks to help them understand how to embrace and mobilize global Christianity.
Man, that's super exciting. And, and just for everybody listening, like this, Daniel's one of those people that's in my life, which is not a lot of people, but one of the people that anytime Daniel says, hey, check this out, I check it out. Like I have been to some Zoom calls, I have traveled to places, I have went to meetings, not knowing what exactly I was going to, but just simply saying, Daniel said, come here. And he hasn't disappointed me yet. He has batted 1,000 out of 1,000 everywhere I've been that he said was worth the time. And so, Daniel, I just really appreciate you, and especially now in this new endeavor and what you're doing. I'm excited. I'm excited. And so, talk a little bit about why is that important for kind of such a time as this? What you're doing. Why now? Why do that?
Yeah, I mean, I know this is going to get into our conversation today, but using my work as an example. So I'm not promoting my work, but I'm talking about my work as an example, especially around the idea of forming networks. So I'm leading an initiative. It's called Churches of Welcome.
Yeah.
And we envision it to be a movement or a network of churches from different backgrounds that are engaged in immigrants and refugee work. And so largely because we see God moving in the world in a way that American Christianity will not have a future if it does not learn how to embrace, the world that has come to the United States.
And I think that's really important. I mean, I think that's really important because, and that's really what I want us to talk about today. Is like there's three kind of categories and bucket, and it's one like with the all of what you're talking about with global Christianity and what's taking place around the world is one. What is the impact of forming networks? Like you're forming a network. We're actually forming a network. My Boulevard family of churches on October the 17th. Our goal is to release and launch 40 churches that are a part of the My Boulevard family. But so like that's thing is like forming them. You're forming a network called Churches of Welcome, right? And so like you said, are 3 months into that. So I want to talk about that. But the other thing I want to talk about is specifically global Christianity. This the impact of global Christianity and how we are to live in light of that. And then the third thing is specifically talking about reaching Gen Z. Reaching Gen Z. And so let's talk about that. Why start another network? It's sort of like churches. People, when you're a church planner, it's like, man, why do we start another church? We have churches everywhere. And now it's like, why start another network? It seems like we have networks everywhere. So why are you starting another network?
Yeah, I think the reality is that you can't bring change into the world on your own. And so the three reasons why I feel like it's important to at least understand why Churches of Welcome or My Boulevard and other networks emerge is in order to make a difference, you have to be able to organize. And so three things like networks bring affinity or identity. So you know who you are. You know who you are because you choose to be something, but you also know who you are because you choose to belong to something. And so that external indicator of who you are it's like your mom used to say to you, choose your friends wisely. That's true about like the network of churches that you belong to. And so there's an identity formation process when you belong to something that's bigger than who you are. And that's what networks are about. And we're saying through our network that we're developing is that we want churches that are discipled to understand the dynamics that happen when you embrace immigrants and you understand what God is doing through global Christianity. Secondly, scalability. I'm not an organizational guru, but I do know that there are some things that need to be decentralized so that the things that are going to grow at the edges can grow. HR, financing, those kinds of things. And so if you think about like the trellis in the vine, the networks provide a trellis so that growth can happen. And, why growth? So scalability is really what I'm talking about. Why scalability? Because thirdly, at the end of the day, you're talking about social impact. So your network is trying to accomplish something in the world. Your network is trying to make a difference in the world. Your network is trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. In my world, we're trying to help churches be discipled so they understand the immigrant, the refugee, and so that they're not tossed back and forth based on political rhetoric, those kinds of things. So there's a social impact that only can be made if you have a substantial numbers of people and churches that come alongside of you. You become the message of the change that you want to bring in the world. And so affinity or identity, scalability, and social impact, those are three reasons why I think networks are important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love even how you summarize that, because I think that's constantly the questions that we all have. We all have like, those things, especially identity, because oftentimes that is really what people are looking for. They're looking for identity. There's a quote by a guy named Chip Dodd, and he says, people will continue to do what harms them unless you give them something to replace it. And people are always frustrated about the people who are out there speaking and tearing down other things, but we're not building anything constructive to actually call people to oftentimes. And I think network is that, like you said, that where you're getting together an affinity and identity and forming that where you can say, hey, here's a space where I belong, where I matter, right, in creating that. So I love that idea about identity and even the idea of social impact. And, when you think about social impact, I think about also not just social impact, because we all can go out and do a deed and get these, and even consecutive deeds. But I recognize that there's another word that I think about is sustainability, right?
Mhm.
It's like, how do we maintain a sustainable social impact? Right. And I think that to me kind of stands out, because it's sort of like when I went to my kids' school, and when my kids were in that school, we made an impact there. But when our kids left and went on to middle school, then we made an impact in middle school. But we didn't leave behind a sustainable work at the old elementary school. But networks give that ability to both make that social impact, but also to sustain it.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, I think that's huge in there. And so in thinking about that, you're moving with Welcome, the Churches of Welcome, to the kind of this global platform, this global Christianity. And we know kind of the shift. I don't know if you're familiar with the late Layman Sanah, who talks about global Christianity, and he talks about the very essence of, and one of the stats and the quotes that I read from him, it was that Christianity is the only religion where 80% of its participants is not living in the country of its origin, right? And so there's very inherent challenges, cultural challenge, ethnic challenges that are in that comes with Christianity, because it, like Jesus says, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so, and this is kind of what's taking place here in America now, where it used to be a kind of seemed like two races that we talked about, to now this globalization that's taking place that's even impacting here. Share a little bit about that, and just, for this time and what your work is trying to address.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important for church leaders to realize that America, our population is roughly 330 million right now. Over 44 million people who live in America are not born in America. So it's a large immigrant population. And then that's on top of second, third generation immigrants like myself. I'm second gen born. And 1 in 4 immigrants come to the United States already as Christians. And so there used to be a saying that says, God is sending the nations here so that we can reach them. And that's probably true for a certain constituency, but it's also true that God is sending the nations here so that they might reach America. And I know this to be true because we know church planters from other parts of the world. They're saying, no, we're here because we want to reach a secular America. And so that's become increasingly true. When I was born, 1979, 1980, this also the same year that Rick Warren planted Saddleback Church. America was still 83% white. According to the U.S. Census and Brookings Institute, by 2040, America will have no majority racial population. And if you read the book Diversity Explosion by William Frey, he says it's 3 main things. Number 1, the white population is aging. Number 2, they're having less children. And number 3, our immigration rates. And there's a reason why the demographics are changing. And some of those are political, but ultimately, because we believe in God and the Bible, we also know that God is behind this, and God is causing global Christianity to arrive here in the U.S., and it's changing American Christianity. And it's also changing the language around how we talk about mission, how we talk about church. And it's challenging some of the old notions that, some people might say, it's kind of more a colonial understanding of mission. It's challenging those notions here in North America. And it's causing us to be more globally minded in the way that we think about how the church is emerging from the U.S. And to me, I think that means that it's setting us up better in a sense to reach Gen Z, because we're not thinking about the church the way that the church existed in 1950 and 60. We're thinking about how the church might exist in 2050.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about that, because I did want to kind of spend some time, and a good bulk of our time, on Gen Z. It is something that is dear to my heart, because I'm raising 6 Gen Zers, right? I am now that father. Back in the days, it's like, hey, like my parents, the old school, y'all don't get us unk.
Yeah.
They call me now. I'm unk. I'm
You're
like all the things that I never thought I would be, because it's like I don't get it, and I'm just gonna admit, I do not get my children oftentimes, right? It's just like in so many different ways, but I love my kids, and I think, but in the same ways, I see so much promise and hope in them. But it is like, and it seems like there's that tension, especially when it comes to Gen Z. But I know that that's one of the, like, your personal passions is centered around Gen Z. Talk about a little bit about like some of your work around that, and even just why that has grabbed your heart.
Yeah. But part of it is because, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm raising 4 Gen Zers and 1 Gen Alphers, so
yes,
I'm just personally invested. You and I are making America, more diverse because of the number of children we're having. So,
we're fruitful and multiplying.
That's right, man. We take the creation mandate seriously.
Yes.
I have been mentoring a lot of Gen Z leaders, and mainly because the churches that I've planted have largely been, they tell you, you plant a church, you'll lead those who are 10 years older than you, 10 years younger than you. And that's been generally true. If I look at my ministry, it's been predominantly millennials and Gen Zers that I've led and discipled. I'm 44, so, it's just kind of the way that it falls. But also, we're at a very interesting point in American institutions, that there is going to be a huge wave of boomers and then Xer leaders that are retiring in this decade. So in 2020, you're going to see tons of boomers retire and some Gen Xers begin to retire. And so millennials will sort of begin to take institutional leadership. They already are. You think about some political candidates, for instance, are millennials and political leaders. And then you're now starting to see Gen Zers enter into that sphere of institutional leadership. But they're only 26, 27. So when we talk about the church of the future, if plans go right, you and I will be dead and with Jesus by then, or we'll be like retired in Thailand. But we will not be leading. But we should not be leading our networks and our institutions. Gen Zers should be. So from my perspective, that's why this decade is so important. It's a bit of the decade of a handoff.
Like, so how do we hand off well? I mean, and I think that's the thing. Yeah. How do we hand off well? And how do we not create a situation where it's like David wearing Saul's armor?
Yeah. So there are 3 things that I've been helping organizations think through when they're talking about like the handoff. And I'm not talking about like leadership succession. That's a part of it. But I'm talking about handing off like the mission of Jesus to the next generation. That's probably just as important, if not more important, than like leadership transition at your executive level. Number 1 is developing the meta skill. So these are like 3 meta skills when you're thinking about Gen Z leadership for the future. Is we need the meta skill facilitating, because our cultural moment requires that our current leaders have the right tone and posture. And so it's less about building something that we can lead successfully. And it's more about developing a platform for the next generation so that they can live out God's calling in their life. Most of us believe this, but then it's taken us a while to actually build and live it out. And so how can you create places where you facilitate mission for others? And that's really important. That's what you're doing with MyBLVD. I consult with a couple of groups, Crew, Generation Distinct. We always have these conversations. How do we actually facilitate mission? The second meta skill is like healing. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier. You referenced Chip Dodd. There's a whole literature around like spiritual trauma that I think is helping us to better understand mission. Matter of fact, Diane Laneberg, she says that she's a psychologist that talks about spiritual trauma. She says trauma is the mission field of the 21st century. I think leaders like you and I, we have to imagine our spaces as where people come to receive healing, not just therapeutic healing, but like what is it about the narrative of Jesus that actually leads to the healing of nations, right? Because that's what Revelations promised us that Jesus was going to do. And so how do we see our mission as a place of healing and not hurting people? And so that's a big meta skill that organizational leaders like you and I, we constantly have to have in the back of our head, that we're creating a space where people can get healed and then go on the mission of healing nations. And then lastly is the meta skill. So, there's the meta skill of facilitating, the meta skill of healing, and then the last skill is the meta skill of seeing. And I want to be careful how I use this term, but when you're a seer like somebody who can see the future, a seer is somebody who looks into the future and they're realist. Like I'm realistic about the future. I think Christianity in terms of percentage in America is probably going to decline. The numbers will sort of stay flat. The percentage will kind of decline. So I'm realistic about the picture of the future, but I'm also optimistic. And the reason why I think it's important to be optimistic, and I get this from my friend Brian Sanders, he says, we live in a world filled with cynicism. And when you live in a world filled with cynicism, it's the optimists that are the prophets and the evangelists. And so as a seer, I'm constantly trying to help Gen Zers be realistic, but I'm also helping them to try to be optimistic about the future. And it's more than just, Jesus is on the throne, although that's true and that's foundational. It's also about, there's the rise and fall of Christian organizations, but the fall means God he's pruning so that there's a better structure that's going to emerge. And you're a part of helping to create that structure for the future. And you don't have to do it alone, because I'm here next to you, helping you to do it. And a good seer, I think, is some ways helping to tell a better story, and then telling Gen Zers, you don't have to do it by yourself. We're here to do it with you.
You just threw out that word meta skill. I don't know if that's a word that you created, you made up. I've never heard words. So you pushed past it. You said it so confidently. So I'm just like, yes, that is a word. My vocabulary is not that big. So meta skill, is that like a real word? Is that a Daniel Yang special?
No, it's a real word. A meta skill would be this idea that this is a skill that's higher than just like a particular basic skill. So let's say, for instance, you're a really good preacher. That's a great skill. But meta skill is sort of like a higher level skill, where it's sort of like a skill that actually releases other people to do more. And so when you have the meta skill of facilitating, you're helping people to do more. When you have the meta skill of healing, you're actually, helping people to be able to live out their own gifts. And so it's kind of like a higher order of skill.
Good. Okay. No, that's good. That's good. I'm particularly interested, about what you talked about healing. And I know you mentioned the psychologists that trauma is the mission field for the 21st century. And specifically looking at that, and there's a quote, I heard you speak on Gen Z once before, and you said Generation Z is not a snowflake generation. They're actually reflecting back to us the cultural chaos that started off this decade. Can you tie that quote with the statement that trauma is the mission field for the 21st century?
Yeah. So let's use my children and your children for example, because I'll be honest, those are the people that I care about the most in the world anyway. So yes. Your children and my children, they grew up during the last 20 years. Your oldest is how old again is she?
She's 22. She's 21 going on 22.
Yeah, my oldest is 22. So they would have seen the economy collapse in 2008. They would have seen, they grew up in the pandemic in a sense. The political season, regardless of whether you're Democrat, Republican, one of the craziest. They saw January 6th. Yes. I mean, they saw George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. They saw all of that, and so this is recorded into their bodies. Like, this isn't just like a social media stream. Part of the reason why Gen Zers have more social anxiety is because they've recorded this into their body. And so in a sense, their anti-institutionalism is just reflecting back to us how chaotic the culture is. And then you want to tell them, go to church so that we can tell you how to live a good moral life. Of course they're skeptical. Of course they're skeptical. Even if they have an authentic relationship with Jesus, they're more likely to be skeptical than a previous generation. And I feel like this is important because we're also saying, and now you go do greater things than previous generations have done in the name of Jesus. And I think we have to reconcile that. And what is the pathway between, like, we know you're anxious and go do more for Jesus? There's only one pathway, and that's helping develop a path of healing, right? And I think in Diane Langberg's mind, that's essentially what she's also saying, is that when you choose to meet people in their trauma, and I know this is true for myself, this is 100% true for me. And when I receive a stronger sense of, I know who I am, and make meaning of why I went through what was so hard, then I have more resilience, and I'm more curious about how the world can change. And I think the best thing that our organizations could do is to create spaces like that for young people. Because if we don't do it as the church, and if we don't do it as church leaders, they're going to look for it in psychotherapy, which is okay, but it also doesn't tell them about what Jesus is doing in the world as well.
I love it. And in that, the same talk, you made another quote. He says, we need to stop shaming Gen Z for being anxious and start asking why, right? And so that's just a different approach to kind of trying to seek understanding before trying to be understood.
I think about this, Dhati. I mean, this is a scary question to ask, but I think it's a metaphor, an analogy for Gen Zers in the evangelical church. Let me just speak towards that. But if you and I went to our children, are both pastors, church planners, church leaders, whatever, and we said, hey, how was it growing up in our household? How is it that I was your father? How would they respond? There's probably the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's also true when you go to a bunch of Gen Zers and say, hey, how did it feel like growing up in American Christianity? They're going to tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we shouldn't shame them for feeling what they do feel. We need to repent, as organizational leaders. And then we need to also say, where God is facilitating healing here, and I need to own up to it, let me do that. And because to me, I think that's exactly what Jesus did with his 12 disciples.
Yeah.
They went on this 3-year healing journey where they had to deconstruct some things and reconstruct some things. And by the time he sent them on mission, they weren't healed up perfectly, but enough so that they could actually start a movement.
Yeah, I love that. Last question, Daniel. I really appreciate you taking this time. And this is the question. I'm a leader. I'm a pastor. I'm sitting here listening to this, all this changing global Christianity, Gen Z. And even like networking, not doing it. Like I'm hearing all of this and I'm just like, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. This seems overwhelming, right? What would you just say is this like advice that you would give? Here's a next step or next steps that you can do in taking on all of the information and making this into a clear next step for some people. Yeah,
it's a good question. So if you're sort of kind of like new to all this and you're just kind of like, I've been a pastor or a church leader and I'm just trying to figure out how to, in a sense where God is expanding my influence. Two things that I think are just really practical. Number one is find somebody who is of a different stage of life, in a different demographic even, to mentor you. That may not be obvious at first, but praying for a mentor that comes from a different place, a different location, a different ministry context, that pays off dividends tons, maybe not in the first 2 years, but in the next 10 years, it's going to pay off dividends. Because you can only know the experience of other people if you actually have a relationship with somebody who's walked through it. So having different mentors, and then reverse that, find a younger person to mentor you. It's called reverse mentoring in kind of business world. Find a reverse mentor. Find somebody who is younger, emerging, trying to figure out life. Listen to them and be empathetic. Learn from them. Invest in them. And they may tell you how they need to grow, but largely without taking advantage of the relationship, obviously, have them mentor you, because largely what I'm sensing, and I'm 44, so I'm not an old guy. Largely, I've realized that most of my work at this point is building something that the next person is willing to build on top of.
Man, that is gold. I love that. And hopefully you guys love that, because that will help. That will sell, or whatever the statement of colloquialism is. But I just really do appreciate you, Daniel. It's every time I talk to you, I'm wiser, and and I'm my benefit from our conversation. So just thank you. Thank you for taking this time. Thank you for doing this twice with me. You are the man. I appreciate you. And if someone wants to connect with you, with the church that direct the churches of welcome, like, how would they get connected with you?
Yeah, super easy. You go to worldleaf.org, and then there's a link there for churches of welcome, or you can email me directly at dyang, Y-A-N-G, at worldrelief.org. So dyang at wr.org.
Appreciate you. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate everybody. And until next time, we'll see you. Peace.